Mind hack number 10. In this video, we're going to talk about whether or not the ego is needed for survival.
Spiritual tools.
Right? Because most people assume that we need the ego in order to survive, or in order to operate, to move and do. But for example, when I say that, it's about to get deep.
There is no spoon.
Say you were jogging your typical trail, you do this every single day. You're about 5 feet away from your car, and you see a cougar, a mountain lion, off to the side. And now this ego, this fear, has frozen you. Now you're paralyzed, and you can't even turn to get in your car. Now you're going to be mauled by a cougar because of this ego, because of this fear. Yet if you were to be operating from a place of awareness, from a place of love, just selflessness, like a martial artist aimed to be in, you would have seen that, been like deuces, and got in the car. You wouldn't have been mauled by a cougar. So my point in that is this, that all you can do in fear or ego, you can do tenfold in awareness and love, just that selflessness, that spot.
Untouched.
And why would you need the ego at the beginning? And what do I mean when I say it has to be dropped and you have to go full circle? When I say that, I mean this. As a child, you're born with this selflessness, this kind of Buddhahood, right? As in, there is no self, but it's an ignorance. You're not capable of even knowing what a self is, right? For the first couple months that a child is born, I believe it doesn't even know. If I'm correct, I believe it doesn't even know it's separate from the mother in that way. It still assumes it's one. So the child is born and it's selfless. It's got that Buddhahood, but in an ignorance, right? It's not in awareness. And then as that child gets older, it is congratulated, it is shunned, it wins, it loses. It has these situations where this ego, this sense of self is developed. And as it gets older, this ego thickens, right? Like a fruit, it starts to thicken and to ripen. It becomes thick enough for you to see what it is. It's exhausting. You start to see how you're treating other people, how you're treating yourself, and how this egotistical side of yourself is just heavy. It's just exhausting. And there's supposed to come a point when you see that for what it is, and like a fruit, it just drops. The point of when it's ripened has came, and it just drops. And to go off my other point, we might say, well, okay, but how is the ego not needed to operate? Recognize this, for example, about to get deep. Recognize how you can operate in a state of compassion, right? A state of passion, a state of ego. So you can operate in love or compassion, and that in itself shows you that the ego isn't needed to operate. Trust me, I've asked myself this 1,000 times and went in circles with myself 1,000 times, but it just isn't needed in that way. So to go full circle is to start as a child in this selfless spot, right? But in ignorance. It isn't aware. This Buddhahood is in ignorance. And then as it grows, it gains ego. And this is natural, it's needed, right? Because in order to see what is, we must first see what is not. So it's needed in that way. But to go full circle is to recognize that ego, this illusion of self, for what it is, which is that it is not, that you are the whole. And in that, no longer do you operate from a place of lack or fear, right? You're no longer in mechanical action like some of the other videos talk about. So you start in this Buddhahood, but in ignorance. You go to ego, and then to go full circle is to gain this selflessness again, but in awareness, in recognition of what you are. And like some of my other examples prior in this video, it's just clear that ego itself is not what makes you move and do. That is awareness itself. A martial artist, their aim, and I'm using a martial artist because it's a fight, and you would think fear and anger is needed in that. It's the same place that a musician, any kind of artist, is going to. But even a martial artist, in this case, that's the place they're going to. Just a place of awareness, response, action, and reaction. To have no fear. To not let yourself get in the way of yourself. Right? Anytime you start acting out of fear or anger or just this illusion of self, oftentimes it gets in the way. We could also talk about how the ego, throughout our history, has kept us alive. Aside from it being needed to see what is not and what is, it has kept us alive in our ignorance, right? Because we cannot go full circle, or we aren't even aware that you can go full circle. We have to operate from this illusion of self. which on one hand keeps us alive, but on the other hand, we suffer much from. So are you really even living in that sense, right? That's also why they would say it's important to die before you die. That way you can live. Because if you can drop that illusion of self, be totally accepting of reality for what it is, it opens up. There's no longer this negative dark cloud, this fogginess that just makes you think, is this really worth it? It's like a child when they see the trees or they see an animal, it's for the first time, right? They're not operating from memory. Nothing's dulled. There's no ego present in that sense. No ego, no memory, no egocentric memory. Nothing's dulled. Coming back to this selflessness has much to do with that even. Just experiencing reality for what it is again, from a place of wholeness, instead of a place of lack and fear. So when you hear a Buddha, or whatever you want to call somebody that's reached that spot, say, I started losing my memory. What they mean by that is they were no longer a mind, right? They were no longer operating from future and past memory. Mind is always future and past, memory in that way. So the difference between a child and the adult when they look at the trees and the birds and the bees is that the adult is operating from a place of ego, this mind, this not the same mind as ego, but because this is a trippy subject, we end up identifying oftentimes mind as ego. Because we have this conceptualization of this thinking, we identify with that, so we think mind is ego. But ego is the illusion of self that we gain from identifying with that stream of constant mind, which is selfless. So it's not that the mind is ego, just to make that perfectly straight. But the adult is operating from that state of mind, a stronger, thicker mind, right? So it's more layered with memory, if you will. So the child, in a sense, everything is fresh. They're less of a mind. If they have even gained that mind in that way yet, right? That sense of ego. Because notice a child, when they're younger, they're not aware of time and death in the way that we are. Somewhat like how an animal isn't aware of time and death in the way that a human is. Not that humans aren't animals, but our species is aware of itself in a way that they aren't. And for a child, when they look at the trees, they've gone outside plenty of times. But every time they go out there, it's almost like the first time because there's no mind about it, right? You give an adult good meditation or a psychedelic, for example, and now they're amazed by nature again, right? Have you ever noticed that? If you've taken any kind of substance and looked out at nature, it seems different, right? You could even be drunk. You could even be just intoxicated. Go outside and nature seems fun again. It's because it's stole that sense of self. You've opened up and you can just sit in the sand. That's what's happening. It's this egocentric mind memory device that's taken over. So when a Buddha says, I'm no longer operating from a place of memory, I no longer have memory, it's not that they don't remember your name, it's that they're no longer a mind about what they're seeing. It's also why Jesus would say, I see everybody for what they are in front of me in that sense, not necessarily a sinner or a saint. They're just with that being for what they are now. There is no preconditioned idea of them. And this isn't to say you shouldn't defend yourself, right? Because as stupid as it is to kill, it's as stupid to be killed. It's to say you should defend yourself, but to show them that aggression does not work, right? Don't operate from a place of anger, from this illusion of self, this fear. Don't strike with a kind of revenge. Do it to show them that aggression does not work. And if you've stopped them, stop and go away. You don't have to fear them in any kind of way. You don't have to belittle them in any kind of way. And the same kind of center and the same kind of awareness, you can walk away. Just like if you were to come across poison ivy on a trail. You don't necessarily have to fear it. You know it's bad, it's not good for you. Your being can remain love and awareness. You simply walk around it. Right? It's no different than coming in contact with an intense individual or an experience where you have to defend yourself. It's just when you defend yourself, stay aware and present and do it with everything that you have. In no way look away from being present. If you have to defend yourself and punch somebody in the face, do it utterly present. Don't let that switch off where your mind and like mechanical about it. I'm not saying punch somebody in the face, but I'm saying there's a difference. It isn't just sit around and be quiet all day. You can live your life, laugh and dance, defend yourself, have pride, self-pride. So that'll be another video. Just recognize when you're an ego and recognize how it is never love. Anytime you are love, it's when the two have become one. The selflessness, right? And that's not ego. There is no ego in that. Anytime you have ever been happy, love, compassion, joy, there's no self to that. That's not been ego, right? So in this video, we talked about whether or not ego is needed for survival. I went into many different areas of it, but in conclusion, it should be obvious that the answer is no. It is not needed for our survival. Is it needed at first? Yes, because in order to see what is, we first have to see what is not. Right? You have to grow, and that is okay. That's natural. That's why there's no judgment in your egotistical actions, because it's ignorance. That's why the Bible would say all sins are equal. And I'm not saying that the Bible was real. I'm just speaking. I'm giving everybody their voice, okay? So from a biblical standpoint, all sins are equal because all sins are ego. That's what that is. If you're not acting from a place of wholeness, from a place of godliness, then it is ego. We'll touch on that in another video. Which, by the way, I have about 4,000, almost 5,000 returning viewers, and 1,700 of you have subscribed. So please do it. After all the deep stuff we talk about, you didn't think I was going to notice? Like, come